Most families leave behind objects, a watch, a letter, a photograph with a crease worn thin by fingers that kept returning to it. Some families leave behind something heavier, a pattern. It doesn't announce itself at first. It moves quietly through generations, through the way decisions are made, through what is said out loud and what is swallowed, through who is allowed to choose and who learns early not to ask. The Rothschilds are remembered for their wealth, their reach, their name etched into cities and myths. But before the name meant anything, before it carried weight or suspicion or awe, it belonged to a family trying to survive a narrow street and an unforgiving world. This story is not about money as numbers. It is about money as pressure, as risk, as responsibility passed from father to son like an unspoken oath. It is a story of loyalty enforced, of ambition disciplined, of love constrained by strategy, of people who learned, sometimes too well, that survival depends not on brilliance alone, but on staying together when it would be easier to fracture. What follows is not the legend. It is the human shape beneath it. The red shield, high, the narrow street. The Judengasse in Frankfurt was barely wide enough for two carts to pass without scraping. Houses leaned toward each other like conspirators. Light arrived reluctantly, bouncing off damp stone, filtered through laundry lines and shouted warnings. This was where Mayor Amschel Rothschild learned how the world worked. His father sold cloth. Mayors sold coins, old ones, damaged ones, foreign ones with unfamiliar faces worn smooth by other hands. Coins told stories if you knew how to listen. They spoke of wars fought far away, of kings who had fallen out of favor, of borders that shifted while families stayed put. Mayer noticed something early. Power rarely announced itself loudly. It moved quietly, through messengers and margins, through who owed whom and who waited longest to be paid. He married, had children, 5 sons, and taught them to read numbers before they learned to read people, and to read people before they trusted them. He did not speak in abstractions. He spoke in rules. Some were practical. Some were moral. All were binding. The world beyond the Judengasse was opening in small ways. Jews were still restricted, still watched, still tolerated rather than welcomed. But money, if handled carefully, could pass where people could not. Mayer understood that the family itself would be his greatest instrument. Not the business, not the contracts, the family. When he was dying, he gathered his sons and told them plainly, stay together, marry carefully, argue privately, present a single face to the world, divide profits fairly, divide power cautiously. Above all, do not fracture. It was not advice, it was a command. 2. 5 directions. The sons scattered across Europe, but not randomly. Each was placed like a piece on a board their father had already imagined. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt, the anchor. Salomon went east to Vienna, close to emperors and ministries. Nathan crossed the channel to England, where suspicion was thick but opportunity thicker. Karl headed south to Naples. James went west to Paris. They wrote constantly. Letters moved faster than armies if you paid enough. Couriers rode through bad weather and worse borders. Sometimes pigeons carried prices tied to their legs, tiny messengers of advantage. What the brothers traded was not only money, it was information. Who was about to fall? Who needed funds quietly? Who could not afford to default but pretended they could? Europe was convulsed by war. Napoleon redrew maps like sketches. Armies consumed fortunes. Governments borrowed recklessly and repaid reluctantly. The Rothschilds learned to thrive in the space between desperation and denial. Nathan, in London, was the most restless. He was blunt, abrasive, impatient with ceremony. He did not look like a man destined for salons or court favor. He looked like a merchant who refused to be underestimated. He learned England quickly, learned the rhythms of the exchange, learned when silence was stronger than noise, learned how to wait while others panicked. When the wars ended, Europe was exhausted but not stable. Peace created new anxieties. Old debts lingered, new states needed legitimacy. Money flowed toward confidence and fled at the first sign of doubt. The brothers were no longer simply intermediaries, they were becoming a system. 3. The speed of news. In an age before telegraphs, speed was everything. A day's advantage could mean a fortune. An hour could mean survival. The Rothschilds invested heavily in knowing first. They paid for roads no one else bothered to repair. They maintained private couriers when governments relied on diplomats. They read between lines, weighted silences as carefully as words. There was a rumor, persistent, irresistible, that Nathan had learned of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo before anyone else, and profited enormously from it. The truth was less theatrical and more revealing. Nathan did receive news early. He did not gamble wildly. He stabilized a market that was trembling. He bought when others froze. He sold later, methodically. The myth endured because people needed drama. They preferred a single clever trick to a lifetime of preparation. The family did not correct the story. Myth, too, could be an asset. 5. Faith without disguise. The Rothschilds never converted. This was not inevitable. Many wealthy Jewish families did. Conversion offered access, ease, protection. The Rothschilds remained Jewish, publicly and privately. They built synagogues, funded schools, intervened when Jews were mistreated by governments they themselves financed. This created tension. They were accused of divided loyalty by Gentiles and of aloofness by poorer Jews. They navigated both worlds without fully belonging to either. Anti-Semitism followed them everywhere, sometimes crude, sometimes refined, sometimes smiling. They responded not with withdrawal, but with insistence. If they were to be present in Europe, they would be unmistakably so. 6. The shape of power governments learned that Rothschild money came with expectations, not ideological, but practical. Stability mattered, predictability mattered. Disorder was expensive. The family did not rule nations, but they influenced the terms under which nations borrowed. Bond prices rose and fell with whispers of revolution, illness, war. Markets became a kind of daily referendum among the wealthy. The Rothschilds watched carefully. They rarely acted impulsively. They preferred to endure. They were accused of manipulation, sometimes unfairly, sometimes not. But the deeper truth was simpler. They understood systems earlier than most. 7. Cracks in the mirror. As decades passed, the world changed faster than the family preferred. Railways transformed distances. New banks emerged. Information became harder to monopolize. Some Rothschilds adapted eagerly. Others clung to tradition. There were failures, investments that disappointed, marriages that soured, sons who did not measure up. The family remained powerful, but no longer singular, and yet the core endured. 8. What survives? The Judengasse is gone now. The narrow street widened into history. What remains is not just wealth or buildings or names etched into species and cities. What remains is a model, of family as institution, of loyalty enforced and rewarded, of patience mistaken for secrecy. They were not saints. They were not villains. They were people who learned, early and painfully, that survival required coordination, restraint, and an acceptance that not every sacrifice would be honored by those who made it. They carried the red shield not as a symbol of protection, but as a reminder, together or not at all. Long after the Judengasse vanished, long after the letters slowed and the couriers stopped running, the family still carried the habits forged there. The instinct to close ranks, the reluctance to trust outsiders, the belief that unity mattered more than comfort, and endurance more than applause. The world eventually caught up. Information spread faster. Power dispersed. The advantages that once belonged to a few became available to many. No family, no matter how disciplined, could remain singular forever. And yet, the Rothschilds did not disappear, because what they built was never only financial, it was behavioral, a way of moving through uncertainty, a refusal to panic, a willingness to wait while others rushed. Every generation inherited not just assets, but expectations. Some carried them proudly, others quietly resented the weight. Not all succeeded, not all wanted to, but the pattern held. In the end, the red shield was never meant to keep the world out. It was meant to remind those within what was required of them. Stay together, move carefully, and understand that what you inherit is not just what your family built, but what it demanded.